Okay, my name is Brant Hunt. Today is the fourth day of January 2023, that is, and what I'm going to do is share some more valuable information, hopefully as those who have ears to hear, those that have eyes to see. And what I'm going to share with you is the UCC-1. It's better to have done it and not needed it than to have not filled it, that is, not filed it and needed it. So this is critical for you to understand, trying to get ourselves out of a hellhole here as we basically put ourselves in hell. And so we're going to look at this particular subject and we'll go from there. So here's the whole setup. This again is by Redemption 4.5, UCC 1. It's better to have done it and not needed to than to have not filed it and needed it. Today, the majority of Americans pay taxes because when they get a job, their employer requests that they fill out either Internal Revenues Form W-2 or a W-4 or a Form 1099, which as a direct result withholds taxes from their paychecks for their labor. The majority doesn't have a clue as to why they are paying these taxes in the first place, other than being conditioned to pay their so-called fair share. Well, it's not their fair share, folks. It was never intended for you to have to pay these taxes in the first place, period, you see. It has been affirmed that labor is a fundamental, unalienable, protected right, and this fundamental right is not supposed to be taxed. No profit gain is to realize via your labor. It is presumed that everyone is expected to know the law. It has been long held that ignorance of the law is not an excuse or a defense. There is a well-established maximum that states he who fails to assert his rights has none, which unequivocally establishes that just as a closed mouth never gets fed, a matter must be expressed to be resolved. The Bible, that is the book of Luke, you can go to Luke chapter 11, verses 52, where it states, these are the middlemen who cause the anguish of all of us. These are the men who actually play games with you, and you really need to stay away from them in a lot of ways. So here's what the statement says. And most people don't. Most people, even Christians, don't even pay attention to this verse. Woe unto you, lawyers, for ye have taken away the key of knowledge. You enter not in yourselves, you see, and them that were entering you hinder. You prevent people from being free. You know you're going to face karma in this life because of what you're doing. And it's time for people to be aware and see the reality of all of it and what they've done to us. And I don't recommend you going to any lawyer, period, for any purposes. They're not working for you. They're working for themselves. They're selfish. The problem is that they've been trained a certain way, and they believe they're doing the right thing, but in reality, they're not. They're not doing the right thing. They're harming people. When it comes to dealing with lawyers, government, and the Internal Revenue Service, which is not an agency of the U.S. government, but a private foreign-owned corporation, withholding and keeping knowledge from the people is nothing new. It is a common business tactic that has been going on from the beginning of its inception. It will most likely continue as long as we rely upon lawyers and government to do that, which we ourselves should be doing. Yeah, the whole idea simply is that we don't need any government. We don't need lawyers. You see, all we need to do is we are the authority. We are the authority, not them. But unfortunately, all of us, including me, at a very young age, accepted this. We believed this form of government that we thought we were free, when in reality, we never were free. That is, since this whole thing with the lawyers, ever since the missing 13th Amendment took place, you see, with David Dodge revealing the truth to us. So I did a video a couple of years ago sharing it. Very few people even look at these things, you see. They're caught up in life, you see. They're not understanding what they get themselves into. First of all, they get themselves in some type of relationship, that is with a guy or a girl. And then what they do, they begin to sign agreements that they never even looked at or read. You know, a marriage license or going to the justice of peace to get approval to get married. Who says they have the right to you know, why? Here's the point. Here's the key. You're the authority. And if you take a woman that you love or a man you love, so to speak, why do you need someone to give approval to that? Why? Why do you need a church to do that for you? Why do you need the government to do that for you? You see? You don't need that. You don't need that at all. And yet we do that. And many of us sign these agreements. And when you sign your name, you're signing a contract. That's just like your word. And it should be your autograph instead of your signature. So when it comes to dealing with lawyers, government, and Internal Revenue Service, which is not, I just said that, I'm sorry, the Bible unquestionably verifies this with the following book of Isaiah chapter 5, verses 13. Verses tell us, therefore, my people are gone into captivity because they have no knowledge. And in the book of Hosea chapter 4, verses 6, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Who is my people? That's all of us, folks. We're all children of God. We all are spirit, you see. We have a spirit, you see. We have a body, but in reality, we are spirit before we come here, and then we actually take into a body. So the whole rationale that people want to be spiritual doesn't make any sense because we are already spirit. There's no point in that, okay? In order to find the answer to why your labor is being taxed when the Constitution says it is not supported, it's supposed to be, it's necessary to understand how government exists and operates. To accomplish this requires a quick review back in history to the time of the war between the states, and the people of the nation lost their true Republican form of government. It was a bankers' war. That's what it was, folks. It's a way of actually trying to either take part of the South, take over the South, or either the North, and then to basically use what we call martial law. And soldiers came to the South and basically forced people to do what they didn't want to do. On March 27, 1861, 7 southern states walked out of Congress, leading this entire legislative branch of government without quorum. You need a quorum, folks. You see, you need that group of states to be there, or else you don't have a quorum. The Congress of the Constitution was dissolved for inability to disband or reconvene. In other words, since that has happened, we have been under martial law ever since. And everything goes on in Washington, so to speak, these days, and people don't see this because they don't want you to see this. I doubt even the senators and congressmen themselves, that is all congressmen, I should say, or House members, Senate and House members, they don't even probably know this. So what happened simply is they've never reconvened. The Republican form of government, which the people were guaranteed, ceased to exist. That's when we lost our country, because it became a corporation. The Republican form of government, which the people were guaranteed, ceased to exist. Out of necessity to operate the government, President Lincoln issued Executive Order number 2 in April 1861 to reconvene the Congress at gunpoint in executive emergency martial law rule jurisdiction. Since that time, there has been no de jure. There isn't, which is sanctioned by the law. We are, in fact, operating in de facto law, you see. Congress, everything is functioned under color of law, the appearance of semblance, without substantive legal right. So whatever is occurring even now is not actually proper. If you could just figure that out and see that, folks, you could understand what's going on. They're operating without actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. Through executive orders under authority of the war powers, that is emergency, law of necessity. The law of necessity means no law whatsoever as per se, or maximum of law as. Necessity knows no law. The law of forbidding killing is voided when done in self-defense. In time of war, laws are silent. Cicero. To establish the underlying debt of the government to the bankers, to create corporate entities that are legally subject to the jurisdiction in which they exist, and to create the jurisdiction of correctly the so-called fraudulent and This is the book. This is a book that's actually got 2 volumes. It's The Law That Never Was. It never was passed, folks. Never was. You see, you had to have 3/4 of the states to actually pass this particular amendment, as all amendments are supposed to be done. And this was done by a couple of gentlemen who had the wherewithal to actually take the time and use their money wisely and to begin to figure out this whole thing. This was done in 1985 by a gentleman named Bill Benson, and Mr. M.J. Red is his nickname, Beckman. And they went to each state to see what states actually ratified this particular amendment. And these are the table of contents here, showing each state and how they voted. They did this painstakingly, looking back in records and seeing what happened. Then they came to the realization, some of them say they quote unquote passed it, or they thought they passed it. But then when you look at it, is it passed per as it was sent to them? And you'll find that there's sometimes a missing period. You'll see a comma where it's not supposed to be at, or it's not capitalized in certain places. What that means simply, it was not passed as the form was sent to them. They did not obey it. Okay? It never passed in 1868, even though they claimed it did. This was a Siskiyou Trust, that is operation that is in law, incorporated into a military, private, international, commercial de facto jurisdiction, not a de jure jurisdiction. This is why everything has been inversed. It's just been completely turned over. Complete. And is belonging to the money power, existing within the mercy of the war powers. The only operational jurisdiction since the dissolution of Congress in 1871-61 is through the 14th Amendment. That is an artificial person, that is a corporate entity, franchise entitled citizen of the United States. Was born to a private corporate limited liability. Section 4 of the 14th Amendment states, the validity of a public debt of the United States to the bankers shall not be questioned. When it does insert what I call to the bankers, that's who it is for, okay? Within the above reference, private jurisdiction of the international bankers, a private and foreign-owned Congress formed a corporation, commercial agency, and government for the District of Columbia on February 21st, 1871. That is Chapter 62, 16th Statute 419. This corporation was reorganized 7 years later, June 11th, 1878, in Chapters 180, 20 Statute, period 102, and renamed United States Government. The corporation privately trademarked the names such as the United States, U.S., U.S. with periods, U.S.S. period, USA, U.S.A. or USA and America. When the United States declared itself a municipal corporation, it also created what is known as a Siskiyou Trust to function under by implementing the federal Constitution of 1871. So what happened was simply is the Constitution itself has become voided. Okay. And that's a pretty big deal, folks. That's why I consider it's the true revolution. But if people would see that basically what's happened and understand this whole deal, but they refuse to see it, or they don't want to see it, because that makes them responsible, you see. People don't want to be responsible for anything anymore. You see, you are you're not the slave here, folks. You are the credit for the country, always has been. But you've been fooled. These so-called civil rights are nothing more than mere privileges. In other words, what happens simply is that you had all your rights, period. Now they simply are giving you a such and such amendment as though, oh yes, here's what such and such, you have this particular freedom. But if you disobey some things, we'll punish you, see. So you're not truly free. So it's a privilege which government license. That's why you have a driver's license. That's why you're regulated. and can reinterpret to suit its purpose at any time for any reason. The federal corporate government, that is, also conveniently somehow forgot to disclose to the people that the term citizen, with which they have made every living and breathing inhabitant a subject, that's why you're a slave, was defined in law as a vessel engaged in commerce. So you're a commercial agent. In 1912, when the bank owned bonds they were keeping the U.S. government afloat became due, the bankers refused to refinance the debt. As a result, the colored martial law rule Congress was compelled to pass the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. This act surrendered constitutional authority to create, control, and manage this entire money supply of the United States to a handful of private, mostly foreign bankers. So what happened is simply these congressmen, they forfeited their right. Actually, they were truly what I call traitors. Traitors. They're traitors. Woodrow Wilson was a traitor. So what we did was simply we were actually creating our own money by the government. What we did was simply instead of it being done by the government, we gave it to a private group of bankers. This placed the exclusive creation and control of money within the private, commercial, foreign, and military jurisdiction of 1861. In other words, it was just building upon the foundation as actually what took place when Lincoln declared martial law to our corporate limited liability. American converted from the United States notes. They don't tell you this in school, folks. They don't even tell you this. And in fact, they're not even taught this. You see, you're not even taught this in school, anywhere, not even in college, nowhere. Only some brave people out here, such as Dr. John Coleman, such as others that we don't even know who their names are somewhat. The book that I just recommended to you also. These are brave men who actually went out there and says, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. There's something fucking wrong. America converted from United States notes to Federal Reserve notes, beginning with the passage of the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. Federal Reserve banks were incorporated in 1914 and in 1916 began to circulate their private corporate Federal Reserve notes as money alongside the nation's de jure currency. So there actually is two forms of money here going on, which is why in 1933 that all changes. You see, they didn't take all the steps at one swoop, folks, because they knew they couldn't do all that. In fact, they would wake up the people too much. So there was also what we call the $10, what we call silver certificate or $20 gold certificate. United States notes, whereas United States notes were actually warehouse receipts for deposits of gold and silver. That's what it was. It represented what the United States had stored the gold and silver in a warehouse, that is a bank, thus representing wealth, substance, portable land, the money of sovereigns. But the new fiat money, the Federal Reserve notes, amounted to bills for that which were yet to be paid. This is a form of credit for what was owed, for the new benefit of being able to carry around U.S. government debt instruments, that is Federal Reserve notes, in our wallets instead of gold certificates or silver certificates. We agreed to redeem the newly issued Federal Reserve notes in gold and also to pay interest for those used in gold only. Essentially, the Fed issued paper with pretty green ink on it, and we agreed to give them gold in exchange for the privilege of using it. What a bargain, folks. If you're not upset about this, something's wrong with you. Something is fucking wrong with you if you don't see what they've done to you. Most of you don't have the guts to even watch it and figure it out. You don't want to. You want to live in a la-la land, you see. And this, I spoke to a young girl yesterday. I think she's probably about 23 or 24 years old. She understood something when I was sharing with her, but very little. And yet, think about this. I was in her same situation when I was 23 or 24. I did know something was wrong also, you see. But I lived in more what I call it good times compared to you guys. You see, the money was not so inflated as it was now. And it's going to continue to get worse. It's not going to get any better, folks. It's just not. Never will. That's why, all these things are happening around you. And you you know, people paying nearly $1,000 to live in one room of a house in California is asinine. Through paying interest to the Federal Reserve Corporation in gold, the U.S. Treasury became progressively depleted of its own gold. American gold certificates, coin, and bullion were continually shipped off to the coffers of various European banks and power elite. In 1933, when the Treasury was drained and the debt was larger than ever, a financial condition known as the insolvency, that President Roosevelt proclaimed a bankruptcy of the United States. Now, this whole idea, hello, this whole administration during the quote unquote Woodrow Wilson, only 20 years earlier, as in 1913, approved of all this. And in reality, that our country was now in far worse shape than it was in 1913 or in 1907 when they quote unquote created a panic, these bankers did. Unless the government is actually printing the money and printing it based upon what it's supposed to be doing as it per silver or per gold, this is what happens. This is the history of fiat currency. For example, read the information about Zimbabwe and what happened to them. You know, they made $1 million. They had they printed paper. They had $1 million, such and such. People took it in. They would the companies for buying food or whatever looked at it and says, "I'm not taking that. Totally worthless." They knew that. It was obvious what was happening. So President Roosevelt proclaimed the bankruptcy of the United States. Every 14th Amendment citizen of the United States was now pledged as an asset to finance the Chapter 11 reorganization expenses and pay interest on particularly to the creditors, that is the Federal Reserve Bank. See, they switched it around for you folks. And the national debt shall not be questioned. No one questioned it. Why is there debt here? Wait a minute. The reason why there's debt is because we gave all this power to the private bankers back in 1913. In reality, simply is we've always been the credit. But they continue to lie to us all the time in the media saying we're debtors. If there was a people, in fact, this is how, if this is how you create credit in a bank, when you sign up for an account, you create credit in that account, folks. Do you know that? But banks change that. You see, they choose that not only to put money in the bank, but in reality, simply they multiply it, sometimes tenfold. So if you put $100 in this work, if they were saying it's $1,000, they actually create money out of nothing, folks. You know, if someone understands this, it would be a good idea to put a lien on some of these banks because they don't have it, folks. They don't have it. And you don't demand paper. What you want is the real stuff. So we continue on. On March 9, 1933, Congress passed the Amenderia Act, also known as the Emergency Banking Relief Act, to the Trading with the Enemy Act. So now we're considered the enemy. Originally passed on October 6, 1917, at a time when the United States was not in a shooting war with any foreign foe. That included the people of the United States as the enemy. Your government actually has declared you an enemy of it. At the Conference of Governors held on March 6, 1933, the governors of 48 states of the Union accommodated the federal bankruptcy of the United States Corporation by pledging the faith and credit of their state to the aid of the national government, which is attached to you. Senate Document 43 of the 73rd Congress, the first session in 1933, did declare that ownership of all property is in the state. That makes us a communist country, folks. Do you know that? Do you know that? That's why you pay taxes on your property. And then you have to have approval of anything, especially the city, if you build anything on your property, by them. And they're going to eventually, as they continue to move on their positions, they're probably going to, what's the word I would say? You won't be able to do those things even in the county. And an individual so-called ownership is only by virtue of government. In other words, you have to ask permission. Law amounting to mere user. That's all you are. An individual user of all property is subordinate to necessity of the United States government. Under House Joint Resolution 192 of June 5, 1933, Senate Report number 93549, and Executive Order 6072, 6012, 6246, Congress and President Roosevelt officially declared bankruptcy of the United States government. Now, again, they declared bankruptcy also in 1871, too. Regardless of the cause or reason, what many Americans either do not understand or have failed to seriously grasp is that by the use of Federal Reserve notes, which are not constitutional money defined under Article 1, 6, and 10 of the United States Constitution, the people in the United States since 1933 have not had any constitutional lawful way to pay their debts. They haven't. No way they can pay their debts. That's why we have debts more than ever, because it's supposed to cancel out. But the only way you're going to be able to do that is to go through the Treasury Department, you see. They therefore have not had any way to buy or own property outright. The people, for the benefits granted to them by a bankrupt corporate government, discharge their debts with limited liability using Federal Reserve notes. They have surrendered by ways of an unconscionable contract and semblance of rights as exchanged for mere privileges. A review of countless United States Supreme Court decisions since the 1938 landmark case was Erie Railroad versus Tompkins, 304 U.S. 64-92, clearly established that only the state has constitutional right, not the people. This is all a sham, folks. The people have been pledged to the bankruptcy of 1933. The federal law administered in and by the United States is the private commercial law of the creditors. That due to the bankruptcy, every citizen of the United States is pledged as an asset to support the bankruptcy, must work to pay the insurance premiums on a underwriting necessary to keep the bankrupt government in operation under Chapter 2 bankruptcy, that is reorganization. That upon the declared bankruptcy, Americans could operate and function only through their corporate color, state-created, all caps letter name, as no access to sovereignty, no access to substance, no access to rights, and no assets to standing in the law. The Supreme Court also held this was a coup, folks. It was a coup d'état. They just did it quietly and declared a mercy under Roosevelt. Roosevelt was more than willing to do this, folks. As soon as he gets in office, he is already declaring a mercy. He's a jackfuck. No longer is it acceptable in office. People, maybe you don't understand how I get upset by it, but the more you learn about this, you should be upset. You shouldn't be passive. If you're passive, you're sick. You're rolling over like a dog. No, we don't go out and shoot people. No, that's not what I'm saying. We go out and figure it out. We learn what's going on and we begin to make it right. No longer is it accessible in operation in the federal courts based on the 1933 bankruptcy, which placed everything into the realm of private, colored law merchants of the Federal Reserve, creditors. Now they're seen as the creditors, but they're not the creditors, folks. We are the creditors. To take this to a different level, not only explain why you pay taxes, but also why you do not own the house you live in, the car you drive, or own anything else you think you bought and paid for. Well, first of all, you paid with debt money, so you don't own it. You see, but you're a slave. You're a citizen. You're a subject. You will need to understand that their state government and its creditors own it all. If you think you own your home just because you believe you paid for it using those Federal Reserve notes, just like everything else you possess by permission of government, simply stop paying your taxes or user fees or license and see just how long government and the creditors allow you to keep it before they come to take it away from you. And they will take it away from you, folks. You may have spent over 100, 200, 300, 400, $500,000, $500,000 on a house, and yet your taxes paid less than $400 or $500, and they will take that house. You did not pay that $400 or $500 on your property, on your house. And then they will sell that house to the highest bidder. And so if there's a possibility, they will sell that house to someone who's only paid $50,000. Think about it. How can all this really be? This is really a hellhole, folks. This is really the hell. This is not heaven here. This is hell. People have to work just to make ends meet. And we have these people up here in Washington that continue to pass taxes, increase taxes and do all this shit because they don't see you as a threat. They've got you submitted. Again, I'm saying not to overthrow them. My point simply is to outsmart them. This is what this is about. You have to outsmart them. Why haven't you been told all this before now? Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Every man is deemed required to know the law. Government expects you to know the law and holds you fully accountable for doing so. Ignoring these facts will not protect you. The majority of Americans have been given a public government education to teach them only what the public, i.e. government, that is creditors, wants them to know. It is, and always has been, each individual personal responsibility, duty, and obligation to learn and know the law. What this breaks down to is this. Back in 1933, when the United States went into bankruptcy because it could no longer pay its debts, it placed the American people themselves without their consent as the asset to keep the government afloat and operating. Because in reality, that was the only asset left, folks. Because government no longer had any way to pay its debts with substance. Well, yeah, they gave it all to the private bankers. They forfeit that right and was bankrupt. It lost its sovereignty and standing in law outside and separate from constitutional government to continue to function and operate. It created an artificial world consisting of artificial entities. This was accomplished by taking everyone's proper birth given name and creating what is called a fiction in law by way of acronym, that is the i.e. a name written in all cap letters to interact with. A name written in all cap letters is not a cynical flesh and blood man. It's a corporation. It's a fiction, or it's a deceased person. It's a dead person. Government, as well as all corporations, including the Internal Revenue Service, cannot interact with you via your proper name given you at birth, only through your all caps letter name. So this is what I'm trying to say to you. When you get their address, simply is if you get something from the court system, they send something to you. When it's an all caps name, that's not you. So this is eventually, I'm trying to help people to discover the truth and begin to dig. Okay, and begin to figure out how you got yourself in this mess and try to get yourself out of the hole. Another little tidbit of knowledge which has been conveniently kept from the people is that this: when the several United States, that's the cap with the lowercase united, and states being the cap, not all caps, but this capital S, signed this treaty with Great Britain ending the Revolutionary War, it was a concession that all commerce would be relegated and contracted through British attorney known as esquires only. Didn't know that. Wow. That's why there was a War of 1812. That's why the missing 13th Amendment had been passed. And that was a threat to the British to control us. You see, they may have lost a war, but they had a way of actually eventually getting right back in with a way in the back door. This condition and concession still exists today. No attorney or lawyer in the United States of America has ever been licensed to practice law. They exempt themselves, as they are legal fiction persons and only a admitted member, all caps, to practice in the private franchise club called the Bar, which in itself is an acronym for British or Barrister, Barrister, aristocratic accreditation regency, and is such an unregistered foreign agent, and so they are traitors. They are traitors. Get that in your head. Esquires is an unconstitutional title of honor and nobility equals esquires. Foreign non-citizens, aliens, are specifically prohibited from ever holding any elected public office, trust whatsoever. Article 1, Section 9 clause states, no title, nobility shall be granted by the United States, and no person holding any office of profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of the Congress, accept any presents, emolument, that's EMOLUMENT, office or title of any kind whatsoever from any king, prince, or foreign state. As a direct result, attorneys and lawyers cannot and do not represent you in your private capacity. It's not worth your time, folks, to even hire these people. Attorneys and lawyers represent corporations, artificial persons, and fictions in law only. Let's continue. What the majority of this country failed to recognize is this: because of the bankruptcy and having been pledged as an asset to the national government debt, this makes all citizens debtors. Under Chapter 11, debtors in bankruptcy have lost their solvency and have no rights or standing in law and are at the mercy of the creditors via their attorneys. This is all done on purpose, folks, little by little. All courts today sit and operate as non-constitutional, non-Article 3 legislative tribunals administer the bankruptcy via their statutes, codes. All courts are Title 11 bankruptcy count courts. It's all about money. It's not about justice. Where these statutes are in reality commercial obligations being applied for the benefit of privileges or discharging debt with limited liability of the Federal Reserve monopoly, colored money, Federal Reserve notes, debt instruments. This means every time you end up before a court, not only do you not have any standing in law to state a claim upon which relief can be granted, you have no constitutional rights. Why? Because you are a debtor under the bankruptcy. And in addition to having contracted away your rights in exchange for benefits and privileges, you do not have one single shred of evidence to have established otherwise. In bankruptcy, only creditors have rights. In a nutshell, as a debtor, you have no rights. Rights are reduced to mere privileges which are licensed, regulated, and can be altered, amended, and changed to meet whatever the particular or special needs of their government may be for whatever whim. And taking away your home, your car, taxing your labor, or locking you up for violating any of the 60 million plus legalities. That's really true, folks. Any of the 60 million plus legislative created debtor codes and statutes that have on the books today happen to meet the needs of their government. It really doesn't take a rocket science to realize who the loser will be. It's you. All these codes by lawyers, foreign enemies. Is there really a real remedy? If there really is a real remedy to what has been done, quite simply, yes. There is one way and one way only you can protect yourself, your family, and property from this public obligation. The only unbreakable contract in existence in the world today is the UCC-1 financial statement. See Section 5 in Appendix, copy of UCC-1 financial statement. Only through filing a UCC-1 financial statement, accepting for value your birth certificate, and executing a lien upon the governmental created all caps letter name by you in your proper birth given name as the secure party, and listing anything and everything your debtor owns, will own, or possibly ever could own, or in control as collateral in the security agreement. And can you effectively and permanently remove yourself from the status of a debtor to that of a creditor, and actually control property, have access to enforceable constitutional rights. By filing a UCC-1 financial statement, you become an actual creditor with standing in law and acquire the ability to state a claim upon which relief can be granted and discharge any and all taxes. By filing a UCC-1 financial statement, you cannot, as a creditor, acquire and access actual original jurisdiction, constitutional rights, as the Constitution only operates upon the agent of government by and through the oath of office to support and defend such, and not violate the same as may be applied to any man. In that, any violation of such is a breach of contract that's applied to the agent. The Constitution does not grant rights to flesh and blood men. Sovereign. The Constitution is a compact, a contract that the private sensible man is not a party to, as you have no contract with the state or federal government, and you're not a signature to their social compact. You're not. Lysander Spooner's proved that. Read some of his works. You might learn a lot from him. Without a UCC-1 financial statement, everything you has been, and is pledged and owned by the state. You merely are the user of the property and must use that property in strict compliance with all the rules. That is, use fees, taxes, and regulations established by the state. If acquiring actual control over property and collateral, releasing your debtor from government control, and the abilities to earn a living without taxation interests you, you have nothing to lose and everything to gain by executing that document without delay. To try and break this down even further, few people truly understands the word slave and slavery. The biggest benefit in filing out a UCC-1 financial statement is that you will no longer be a slave. The fact is most dictionaries fail to provide an accurate definition of the word slave and slavery. Even Webster's 1828 edition of the English language dictionary fails in its attempt to define the true meaning of the word slavery. Slave, a person who's wholly subject to the will of another. Slavery is not a matter of being totally 100% subject to the will of another. Any person who is, to any degree, involuntarily subject to the will of another is still a slave. There are no degrees of slavery. The second part of the second definition of slavery provided by Webster, 1828 edition, is one who surrenders himself to any power whatsoever, which is closer to the real point. So the Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, governs all commercial transactions in the United States. Any person, including government, corporations, agencies, etc., involved in the sales of goods, commercial paper, bank deposit, and collections, letter of credit, bulk transfer, warehouse receipts, bill of lading, investment securities, and secure transactions is governed by the UCC. The A form of Universal Commercial Code is adopted by all states. To comply with the UCC code, in your state, a UCC-1 financial statement must be filed with the Secretary of State by anyone who makes a claim against any other person in this area of commerce. All government agencies, as city, county, state, and federal, operate in commerce. That's why they're corporations, folks. And all of them, including the Internal Revenue Service, are private corporations, persons. They're not flesh, man, or woman. It's a false entity. All courts operate in commerce. All banks operate in commerce. All corporations operate in commerce. And all of these entities exist financially because we are their collateral. They borrow on our credit. Okay. At one time, our currency was backed by, given substance by gold and silver. It has been thought by many since the United States took the substance of gold and silver away. The Federal Reserve note was simply worthless paper, backed by nothing at all. That is not correct. Today, real people, you and me, your children, etc., back Federal Reserve notes. So we are the collateral for the notes, you see, because they use our energy. Much the same way that gold and silver used to be in the past. In other words, the living, breathing person now, or people, guarantee or provide a substance for all money that is created. The Federal Reserve Bank clearly states Federal Reserve notes are backed by the full faith and credit of the American people. It's there. It states it right there, clearly. Blind faith sets forth that you trust them. Who? None other than the Federal Reserve. Credit means something is due to you. You see, the Federal Reserve uses our credit to create all money. All the money creating belongs to the American people. And the deceit of the public and private corporations is so complete that they create it, charge it to us as a debt, and then tack interest to it on top of that. How did the American people become collateral for the debt instrument known as Federal Reserve notes? It was given to the Federal Reserve by a corporation called the United States, the very same corporation that created the Federal Reserve, as was discussed previously in 1933 when President Roosevelt declared a national emergency because the United States could no longer pay its debts. At least that's what the spin was given to us as American people. All of the subsidiary states agreed to support declare bankruptcy by pledging the energy of their citizens. So those that were actually state citizens were now pledged to do that, their energy. Their assets consisted only of state citizens. The states in turn used the birth certificate to pledge the state citizen as collateral to keep government afloat. That is how the American people became collateral for the Federal Reserve notes and so-called debts. The American people became warehouse receipts, like a warehouse full of any type of valuable goods. All of this, however, was a major fraud. Neither the Internal Revenue Service nor any other entity of government files a UCC-1 financial statement to the Commercial Registry with the Secretary of State. If they did, they would instantly become subject to all the regulations of the UCC. The Internal Revenue Service has done very nicely by puffing, bluffing, and intimidating, as all other mentioned, by operating under public policy, where there is in reality no law at all. See, they changed this all. It used to be public law, but they changed it to policy. You see, this took place under Roosevelt. Now, policies. Not public law, but public policy. And that's when you became a communist country. No longer a true republic. And you don't know this because simply a state citizen is drawn into commerce when their birth certificate is registered and sent to the Commerce Department. Mine happened when I was born. 4 days later, I was a part of their system. I didn't know that. 4 years old, I'm 4 days old. How would anybody know that? This is a brilliant plan that was developed in hell. They never bothered to tell you this neither, folks. Never did. None of them. This is why I'm doing this, to make you aware, to truly make you free. So this is where the American people became warehouse receipts upon which all the money printed and circulated is created and guaranteed. In short, the American people became the collateral for all debts. Yes, people also are largely our government property. Yeah, government is a fiction, folks. It's a belief system. When you realize they don't have any power over you, that's when the veil drops. They don't have any power unless you believe in them. You put them, the authority, ahead of you instead of you being the authority. When this all collapses, it will collapse. It's either going to happen the way they want it or it's going to happen the way we want it. Government itself is a fiction. It is an artificial person and deals with us as fiction or artificial persons only as stated before. To take this still to another level, let's use an example to explain and use the name of John Henry Smith. John Henry Smith was born. His parents gave him the Christian name of John Henry, and he shared the family name of Smith. So you're John Henry, and your last name is your family name of Smith with all the other members of his family. He was born a living, breathing, sentient being. When his birth certificate was sent to the Department of Commerce, why would it go to Commerce for? Why would it not go somewhere else? Why would it go to the Treasury Department? Because the Department of Commerce, you became a part of commerce. You became the money. See, we're still operating on the law of the sea, which has nothing else to do but commerce. The sea allows one vessel to ship to another vessel to a port. It's all about money. It's all about commerce. It also started in a lot of ways in 1666 in England. We won't go there. I've already explained that. So John H. Smith suddenly becomes, the fictional name becomes John H. Smith in all caps. Not John H. Smith with what we call a capital J, a capital H, and a capital S. His all capital letters name was registered as a corporation of the Puerto Rico Department of State Corporations. And their post office box is 3271 San Juan, Puerto Rico, 00904-3271, making it and him liable for taxes. But it's offshore, folks, isn't it? He's now a fiction or artificial person, a non-living, non-breathing person. It is a straw man or a fiction upon which the government brings all its so-called charges against and never does so against a real person, just like yours. His driver's license now reads capital John H. Smith, all caps. When he signs a 1040 tax form, he dutifully fills out the form as John H. Smith and then signs his name under penalty of perjury, thereby admitting he will be responsible for all taxes of John H. Smith. Wow. If you had to sign the deal, you see, but that when you signed it, you signed a contract. You said you would do it. You see? Corporation, look at your driver's license and see who it issued to. Look at it. How can a government use a form of our name and turn it into a fiction corporation without our permission? They can't. But we signed our name to all of those forms, which is purely voluntarily. Permission and ignorance. In short, we do it to ourselves. We're the blame here, folks. We are the blame. However, for those who wish to control and own this fiction and prohibited government corporations, including the Internal Revenue Service, from making so-called charges against it, the remedy is available to you. You do this by executing a UCC-1 financial statement. John Henry Smith would simply do what government and the Internal Revenue Service does not do. File your UCC-1 financial statement in the commercial register with the State Secretary of State and claim everything related to John H. Smith, see all caps, or any derivative name, corporate fiction, the birth certificate, and the Social Security account / card number. The living, breathing, real man / woman then controls the fictitious entity, including all contracts relating to birth certificate and Social Security account number. The UCC contract trust account number, that is, you see. Thus, the real John Henry Smith secures all rights, interests, and titles in the fictitious entity that is all cap John H. Smith. Now, government and the Internal Revenue Service has to deal with John H. Smith, that is non-all, as a creditor now, not as a debtor. Most every living, breathing central being has a Social Security card. The number is the account number to your UCC contract trust account, maintained through the U.S. Department, Secretary of Treasury, to the Internal Revenue Service. The Internal Revenue Service calls the Social Security number your tax ID number, the TIN number. Never do they mention our employment identification number. What? You are not an employer, so you do not have an EIN number. So some believe we are all employers, and every one of us has an EIN number. Most recently, the number has been identified and clarified as the exemption number, indicating that the secure party holder is exempt from the liability. If you apply for a new Social Security card, not a new number, on the back side of the card, the number written in red is what some believe is the bond number. The bond, the account, is established by the government upon your application, SS5 form. It is also believed that government workers are all our employees, that every government employee works for us. How absurd. Since you are not a signature to the U.S. or any state constitution, and since you are not a party to the state social contract, or compact, I should say, then you have nothing to do with the government corporation, and the government corporation has nothing to do with you. This is why when you read the tax code to find the definition of employee under Title 26 U.S. Code at Section 3401/C, the term employee specifically includes officers and employees, whether elected or appointed, of the United States, a state, federal or state, territory, or any other political subdivision thereof, or the District of Columbia, or any agency or instrumentality of any one or more of the foregoing, and nobody else. Write to the Bureau of Statistics, the capital of the state where you were born, and then request a copy of your birth certificate. Request the long form, that is the certified copy. Never mind that you have a copy right now. More likely than not, it came from the county in which you were born. The number assigned to your birth certificate by the Vital Statistics Office is of primary importance when executing your UCC-1 financial statement. The usual and current birth certificate is in color, you see. Bank stock paper. What can filing a UCC-1 financial statement do for you besides everything described thus far? Let's throw a few more examples onto the table to explain. As previously stated, the only real thing in the United States is the American people. Corporations are fictitious dead entities. Let's use a fiction called General Motors for our explanation since the inception of General Motors, which were originally created by another corporate fiction we call the government. They have borrowed into existence countless billions of Federal Reserve notes. Today, General Motors proudly calls themselves one of the largest corporations, a fiction in the world, though. It is taught that stockholders of General Motors, as all caps, owns General Motors. The real truth is that the American people own everything produced by General Motors, free and clear. Isn't it interesting? This fiction charges the American people whatever belongs to us, and then to add more insult to injury, they tack on a little interest to boot. Yeah, your credit card is your money from your trust. That's what it is. And if you charge interest, you pay interest on the money that actually is yours. When Internal Revenue sends a letter or notice to the fictional John H. Smith, that's the all caps, and says our records indicate you owe $15,000. John Henry Smith, that is in lower caps, who has filed a UCC-1 financial statement, now has multiple options as to how he chooses to deal with this matter. John Henry Smith knows full well he must respond to the presentment he just received from the Internal Revenue in a timely manner. Depending on the notice or presentment he received, he has either 10 days or 30 days to respond. If he does not know what his time frame is to respond to it, to play it safe, it would be best for him to respond before the 10 days expires. John Henry Smith knows that if he doesn't respond after the allotted time, the Internal Revenue will enter a default judgment against him because he failed to object to the bill or ask any questions about it. Having defaulted, the amount can lawfully be collected from him. It's really sad. John Henry Smith also knows that if he's not to protest or argue the amount of deficiency in any tax case, if you're not required to file, you should not care whether they say you owe $15,000 or $100 million. If you are not required to file, the amount doesn't matter. You never argue the amount because that is a fact issue. The reason for this is usually when you receive a notice of deficiency, it is for some unworldly amount. The Internal Revenue Service wants you to run in and argue about the amount. The minute you say, I don't owe that money, you have just agreed that you owe something, you see, and conceded your jurisdiction. One of the proper methods is to, as soon as possible, send a conditional acceptance for value for proof of claim, to seek an agreement with the IRS in relation to certain points and facts that all you can do to discharge the tax liability of your to charge your liability of your debtor, straw man with bill of exchange. Some believe that John Henry Smith can exercise option number 2 and can accept the $15,000 for value and return it to value. So the called debt is extinguished. While it sounds logical, we have seen no evidence that this process is honored. It may be possible because every real American has a corresponding offsetting credit for all debt claiming against the debtor's straw man. However, keep in mind, when you do your chargeback, you charge up your UCC contract trust account so that you can use that credit to discharge fines, fees, taxes, or debts. Real folks all across America are filing UCC-1 financial statements and understanding the commercial scheme of debts and fraud of this beast system called by many as government and their created fictions. It's been established lawyers and attorneys have written well over 60 million codes and statutes to confound and confuse the American people and enslave them. None of these codes or statutes apply to any living, breathing, sovereign man or woman who claim their heritage through what their creator God has preserved. After filing your UCC-1 financial statement, it becomes evidence of a secure interest in a debtor/fiction, aka straw man, whom the Internal Revenue Service uses to force, intimidates, threatens, and compels a real flesh and blood man, woman to pay what are called taxes. Under UCC, a financial statement is used under Article 9 to reflect a public record that there is a security interest or claim to the property/goods in question to secure a debt or interest. The financial statement is filed by the secure holder, the real man/woman, with the Secretary of State or a similar public body. As a result, becomes public record and becomes evidence of title. As a party in control of the debtor/fiction or straw man, you become the secure party with all rights, interests, and title in the debts, debtor and/fiction, birth certificate, social security account, driver's license, automobile, certificates of title, credit cards, loans, property, taxes, etc., etc. So what did it cost the money changers to enslave the American people? Nothing. Same is true for freedom. But thus said the Lord, you have sold yourself for naught, nothing, and you shall be redeemed without money. Isaiah 52, chapter 4, verses 1. Let me see what the time value is, because I may need to look at it because it's gone. Might be a little long here, so let's see what we're going at. Yeah, we're approaching an hour here, so I'm probably going to stop here. Just simply again, just don't want to go too far. So we're going to stop there. We'll deal with the next deal called bait and switch versus contract acceptance. Okay, appreciate you being here. I hope that some of you will take notice of this. It's very important information. Again, this is from Redemption Manual 4.5. You can order that book from eBay. You choose to do that. You can also get this book from where I did. Actually got it from. I paid $300 for more information for all the information I've gotten. And so I'm reading from that particular information. And if anyone's interested in that, I will, let you know where to go from that. But this is all for U.S. people. This is not for British or Germans or whatever. I'm reading this to the audience of U.S. people. Although there are other ways around this, meaning what I'm trying to say someplace, if you're a foreigner, you have similar situations that we have here in America, because all of us on this planet are slaves, and we're being used as cattle. So thank you, and I wish you a good night. You take care.